Pues vamos a continuar con la sesión de tarde y vamos a entrar en el interesante mundo de la interacción hombre-máquina. Then I'm going to switch to English because our speaker came yesterday, Derek from Japan. So he's Soheil Keshmiri. Soheil is originally from Iran, where he grew up. Then he moved to India, to the university, Pune University, to study computer science. And after he got his master, he moved to Canada, where he pursued his PhD in the Simon Fraser University, focusing on multi-robot coordination and decision-making. He stayed for a postdoc there, and then in 2014, he moved to be team lead at the National University of Singapore, where he focused on algorithms to enable robots and construct internal knowledge of their workspace. Now he's a lead researcher in the Hiroshi Ishiguro labs at the Advanced Telecommunication Research Institute in Japan, where he conducts research focused on computational modeling of the neurophysical signals for developing intelligent and interactive elderly care systems and companion robots. So, Soheil, thanks a lot for coming to share a bit of your advances. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for attending my talk today. I'll be presenting some of the results that me and my team, we've been able to produce on the area of the more of the human-robot interaction, in the sense that you can use the robots for as of a medium in order to see whether you can actually make this older people, in particular, benefit from the use of the embodied communication medium, and to see whether it can be actually helpful to them in order to get their brain activity higher, to get them more involved in the communication, and hopefully in the future be able to make use of this medium, the embodied medium, in order to address or at least postpone certain type of diseases that comes with the aging, such as dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and those. I will be specifically focusing on what is called in today's research in robotics as of a socially assistive robotics, which is a subset of so basically, if you want to picture it, it's more of the type of a robotics that focuses on the use of the robot from the psychological perspective, in the social aspect of the robot, other than the physical aspects of it. It's a subset or a complementary way of using robots that goes along the way that the rehabilitation robotics working on, but the rehabilitation robotics mostly focuses on use of the robots, such as the prosthetic robots and those type of robotic system, in order to assist people physically when they are physically challenged. But in the case of the SAR, or the socially assistive robotics, they focus on the mental aspects, on the psychological aspects, how they can be supportive through the social part of the individual's life. I will first share a few results in the literature that are quite impressive. They are at the very preliminary stage, but they are quite impressive. They go along the direction of the autism spectrum disorder, healthy elderly care, and also very early age development of the kids and children, and how the robots, from the socially assisted robotics perspective, can be helpful to make use of them. So the first study that was in the 2014 focused on this robot called Chili. The purpose of using this robot was to teach children, generally very young kids, to have a better sense of their diet. What is the healthy eating? The study was conducted for 3 weeks. It was for the kids, as I mentioned here, for 5 to 8 years old. They communicated with this agent, and they showed their own perspective, and the robot gave them a feedback for 3 weeks, and they do it on a daily basis. And by the end of the study, what they found was all the kids were showing a better understanding of what a healthy diet is. At the same time, they were able to actually enrich their vocabulary to describe and to share their own idea of what is to be said about something that is healthy when it comes to the food and eating. In the second study that they conducted, and it's been actually quite a new one, in 2018, it was published in the Science Robotics. It was the study that dealt with the kids that they were dealing with the autism syndrome disorder, ASD. And the type of a study that they conducted, they focused on what is known in the psychology and neuroscience as of the theory of mind. That's basically the part of our ability, social ability, that we can reflect what we know to the other people. So we can actually socially get engaged and actively interact with them. So the type of material that they used was this kind of storytelling, but the storytelling was more directed toward the part that they know in the autism spectrum disorder. They are showing a sort of deficit. That would be emotional part of the story, or turn-taking, or perspective-taking. Like, if I know something and I know that someone else doesn't know it, can I actually reflect on that? Most of the time, ASD people won't be able to easily do such a inferential reasoning. And the other part was the sequencing, like now whether there is a temporal information, if they can actually extract those temporal information. The study was conducted as I said, with kids, and it was for the 30 minutes over a period of almost 1 month. By the end of the study, what they found was the kids were actually able to not only learn from the robot when they were interacting with the robot, to learn such perspective-taking, emotional information extraction, but also to transfer what they've learned to their interaction with the other humans, which was quite an exciting and interesting result from that perspective, which is actually indicating it's not just about the interaction with the robot, but the kids are able to actually learn it and then transfer it to the human-human interaction. And also the caregiver were mentioning that there was less of a prompting, and by prompting is like, jumping from information to information, cutting the type of communication that is happening, and they were more socially active and involved in the type of interaction that they had with the caregivers. The third study was concerned with the older people. They were healthy elderly people. They didn't have, and they were not suffering from the dementia, but they wanted to specifically address the issue whether using a robot or using something like a companion pet, such as a dog, would actually benefit older people in their daily life in the healthcare system that they were being, and in the elderly care facilities that they were actually residing. The study was quite a long one. It was for a long period, like 12 weeks. The older people were communicating with this robot, which is that Paro, that seal robot. And they were compared the results that they had for the interaction of these older people with the Paro, with the seal robot, with the resident's dog. And they found out that people were more communicative with the robot, these older people. The robot was encouraging them to have more social interaction even with one another. And it seemed that the results were actually indicative of use of the robot might actually be helpful towards solving the issue of the loneliness between these older people that they're actually staying in these elderly care facilities. The last one, which is my favorite one, is this one. And the reason that I call it the favorite one is because there are implications to it that we have to be concerned about, and we will get back to those implications later. This was a 5-month study done with the kids aged 10 to 24 months, very, very young kids. They introduced this robot to the childcare facility that these kids were actually playing, and the parents were just leaving the kids there during the time that they were working. Initially, what happened was the kids were actually considering robots as of an other, something different, something as of a toy. But by the end of 5 months, they realized that the kids actually do not consider the robot as of a different entity, but one of them. They treated him as of a human, as of one of the kids, playing with, taking care of, even getting into argument over another toy. This was a very nice study after 5 months and finding how you can actually make kids at that age receive a medium that you're introducing to them completely differently. This has nice part into the stories that we can actually see, but there are implications that actually alert us about something in the future and how we are going to be making use of these agents. So from the research perspective, everything looks fine, and it looks very nice. It seems quite promising. But at the same time, when you look into the market, it seems that the market is also actually demanding, and there are room for more development, and there are room for the demand from the market and from the people in the society. We've been seeing quite a linear increment in the revenue that has been made through the field of robotics. And if you look at the results that has been actually announced with, for instance, the Fortune or The Economist, what you can see is the major development and major demands are actually falling on a side that are more assistive, like rehabilitation robotics or the socially assistive robotics. That means even though there are part of this whole idea of having a robots, particularly through the media and through the TVs and stuff, that are quite dark and they're not very nice, and we have to be careful and we should be scared of them. But there are actually benefits, and there are quite a positive side to them, and we can actually make use of them if actually we use them responsibly. So, given those ideas and what we've seen as of an introduction part and the potential of the market that we can actually see about it, our team looked into some other aspect of the robots, and particularly the embodied robot, the physical agents. And during this talk, I'm going to share some of the results that we got in our team. And what we focused on was mostly whether the physical appearance of the agent, of the medium that you're using, whether it's going to be your cell phone or it's going to be TV or it's going to be a robot, does that make any difference? Is it important, or it's just a random event and it can be anything? In order to do so, I will start with what is known as of the media equations, and I will shortly after I will tell you what the media equations is and how we approach that media equations and what we've seen in our results, focusing on that part of the study of the medium, of the communication medium. So there was a very nice study that has been, it's been quite a long study, and they brought it all together in a book called Media Equations. Basically, what the media equation claims is people treat their communication media, whether it's a TV, it's a computer, it's a cell phone, they treat it just like a human. And what is interesting and nice about it is when you look at it and when you ask these people through their brain activity or through the questionnaires that you hand in to them, their responses is, no, this is not reasonable, this is not logical, it's not rational to treat something that is a medium, that's just a device, as of a human. So they actually say they don't do so, but the fact is, the results show that they subconsciously treat them as of a human. As a very first-hand experience that I had was, every morning that I wake up, I use my cell phone to see if I see that the sky is overcast and there's a possibility of raining. I use my cell phone and I ask this Google Assistant whether it's going to rain or not. And there is this nice lady voice that responds back to me that yes or no. And then I found myself saying thank you every time that I use it. Then I started questioning my own logical mind, trying to pretend that I'm a researcher, that this is stupid, it doesn't make sense what you're saying thank you to your cell phone. So I stopped saying thank you, and then I found myself feeling guilty, that I am impolite, I'm not acting properly, particularly there is a woman, there is a girl, there is a lady on the other side of the phone, and then I started saying that you are completely out of your mind. It doesn't make sense really. But that's what I did, and I did it without any rational or conscious decision-making. It just came to me because I've been raised like that, or it's the way that we've been wired, or it makes life easier for us because we don't have to make decisions every single moment of our life if you categorize things. So if that would be the case, then the next question that comes into picture is what is known as the computer-mediated communication versus what is known as the physically embodied communication. It's been quite long known that computer-mediated communication makes people feel more, so to speak, safe. they open up easier. They talk about their emotions easier. And one of the aspects of this computer-mediated communication that has been focused on and emphasized on is the fact that you're not communicating with the other person face-to-face. So there is not much of a pressure on you. That makes things go easier for you. And they have actually checked it, and they've seen that people who are struggling emotionally, or even schizophrenic people, that they find the whole communicative, socially communicative mingling with the other people much easier, and they get more involved in their own treatment, and they receive it better, and the results are quite more promising. But on the other aspect, which is the physically embodied communication, what they found is the fact of having something that is physically there. You can actually feel the presence of the other. That is quite beneficial, and that makes a difference in the sense that it promotes sociability. It also reduces anxiety. There was a research that has been published in the Nature Scientific Reports that shows that the hormonal level that causes the anxiety in people goes down when they communicate through a physically embodied medium than they're using their cell phone or they talk like face-to-face. There was another study that showed that if you make the medium that you're using in the healthcare to give advice to people, if that thing has a face, people receive it better, and they consider the suggestion from the machine more valuable than text that's been shown on the screen. And that actually has an effect on people. So given these differences, in both sides, we see that there are actually pros, there are good things, and there are positive results. This becomes something to be addressed, something to actually look more profoundly into, and to find out whether there is actually a significant difference in using either over the other, choosing one over the other one. And the reason for that is we are living in a world that shows that we are actually aging longer. That's, to some extent, is good, like the life expectancy is going high and people are expecting longer life, but at the same time, it means that, like, for instance, by 2060, there's going to be almost 100 million people over the age of 65 living in this planet. That's quite a big number. At the same time, that causes trouble for the healthcare system. We are already in shortage of personnel. We don't have enough people to take care of the older people right now in the elderly care facilities. At the same time, it seems there are indications of our society is actually getting less along with one another. The loneliness among the people is actually increasing. People are relying more on their medium, like going to the Facebook, stuff like that. And then the fact becomes, is it important? Does that make any difference to use a certain type of media over the other one to help people along the journey that they're taking in their life? And that's basically what brought us to the question of to embody or not to embody. And this is basically how we started looking into our research. Marshall McLuhan was one of the influential in the 50s or 60s in the field of communication. He actually had a book that's called The Medium is the Massage. You can make your message look any way that you want to manipulate and to sell it to people if you know how to frame it. That was basically the message that he delivered through his book and through his research. A flag can be just a flag, but that can actually cause division between the people. That can signify something that does not really have much of a meaning, but at the same time, you can make it to actually have a significant meaning and make people feel differently about it. And that is basically applicable to anything that is coming through some sort of the medium to you. So we try to look into this aspect of the communications and the device that we are using to communicate our message with the other people. So this is the overview of the research that we did, the two of them. In one, we questioned, which was the paradigm one, embodied medium increases our attention. In that one, we looked into the fact of having a medium that has a specific type of physical attribute. As you can see in the picture, we used 4 different types of media. I will go through them more in details, but there was basically a robot, minimal robot, there was a speaker, there was a video chat, and there was a real human. In the second part, we focus on the fact that does this physical appearance of the agent make any difference when you actually physically interact with it? In the first paradigm, we didn't have any interaction. It was just sitting there, and the people were actually using them passively. In the second one, the type of interaction was more active. People were getting physically engaged with that agent and using it as of something that becomes part of their own existence. So for the paradigms, for both of the paradigms, we focused on storytelling. The reason that we used storytelling was, first, stories can be fixed and the contents can be kept intact. So you're communicating with people the exact same material over the time. So there is less confounding effect of some other aspects, such as little change in the material that you're communicating with someone compared to the other person, and that might cause trouble. Stories also have certain aspects that are very close to home, very close to our daily life, social life. That's the narrative. We all live our own narrative. We all have our own stories in our heads. Sometimes they're not really true, but we tell them because that's how we can get through life. And then we focused on brain activity through all these two paradigms that I'm sharing in here. And the reason that we focused on the brain activity is because many of our responses are not actually generated rationally, or we think that we are aware of them, but they have already been happened when we do them. We act upon them, but we are not actively generating them. And we focused specifically on the prefrontal cortex, basically this part of your brain. And that's the regulator of your brain. That's the modulator of your brain. That's the part that talks to the deeper part of your brain, your limbic system, emotional part of your system. And that's the part that tells you, don't do this, you're going to regret it. Or go for it, this is the time to do it. That's the prefrontal cortex. And the nice thing about prefrontal cortex also is that since we were using the storytelling, and that was a verbal communication, prefrontal cortex also modulates the part that is associated with the language, with the story comprehension, and social cognition. So that was the reason that we actually focused on this part of the brain and the stories. So without further ado, the first paradigm, it was embodied storytelling without physical interaction with the people. We had quite some results out of this particular paradigm that were published since 2017. And the basic hypothesis, or what we were thinking when we were studying this physical embodied interaction without any physical active engagement, there were two questions that we were trying to answer. First was the fact of physical embodiment, the embodied agent, the change from a cell phone to something that you see right in front of you, makes your brain act differently and gets your brain activated. And at the same time, there was the follow-up hypothesis that we were looking at, and that was this activity that you see, this change of activity that is due to the change of the embodiment of the medium that you're using, can actually help significantly decide on whether people are feeling certain type of emotions or mental states, such as the content was difficult, or I feel tired, or this physical embodied agent made me feel that I'm actually communicating with a real human other than talking to them through a medium. So there were four, as I said, type of media that we used. First one was that minimally communicated robot that doesn't look like a human. This was a minimal design for a human. It looks like an amputee, but the reason that we did it was we wanted to use the minimum attributes that can be given to a medium to make it feel like a human, but not being exactly there, not being exactly a human. The second one was speaker, so you were just receiving the information as of using a cell phone or listening to the radio. The third one was the video chat. Basically, you had the visual information of someone that you're talking to, but there was no physical presence of that person in the communication part. And the fourth one was the control case for us, which was the actual human. So you're sitting and listening to another human telling you a story. The way that we collected the information from the brain was we used a device that is called functional near-infrared spectroscopy. What it does is, in a nutshell, it sends the near-infrared rays, and it passes through your skull and goes through if it is deep enough, it goes through your brain part, and it bounces back. The amount of time that it takes to bounce back, it shows how much oxygen is inside your brain at that, inside the blood vein at that point. And the basic hypothesis is like the more oxygen, the longer it's going to take. And the more oxygen is basically indicative of the fact that that particular part of the brain should be getting activated because it's hungry now, it's consuming more oxygen, it requires more because it's trying to do something. And we put it here, which is like a orbitofrontal part. This is the part of your brain right above your eyes, and it's the part that tells you good or bad, pleasant, unpleasant, difficult, not difficult. We used two groups of people. We combined them together. A part of them were older people, and part of them were younger people. And the reason that we did so was because we wanted to see if there is any effect of age. Like maybe younger people, being from the younger generation, they receive it better, but the older people reject it. And then we asked people questions. There were questionnaires that asked about the difficulty, human presence, and the fatigue, the tiredness that they felt. It was on the scale of 1 to 8. 1 was not at all or very easy, and 8 was very difficult or very tired or very human present feeling. The way that the study was set up was, as I said, there were 4 different communication media. Every person went through all 4 of them. We kept the story and the medium grouping and relationship fixed, but then we randomized who is going to listen to which one first. And the reason of randomization was we wanted to make sure that there is no effect of listening to a story first to this medium is going to make a good or bad effect on the next one. And it was like 3 minutes, the resting part, then picking one of them, listening to a story that was at 3 minutes, and then going for the next one, again resting 3 minutes of a story and going all the way to the end. 4 different stories, 4 different media, every participant. The model was something like this. That blue colors means they are very comfortable. They don't feel anything. And this is the scale that you see, that's from blue to the red. And this is one of the times that they were communicating to the telenoid. The story was coming through. The yellow color means somewhere in the between. And the person, this is the FNIRS device that we were using. And based on how they felt at that moment, you can actually see how the color changes. That means how much activity we were detecting at that time when they were listening to that story and when they were going through that story. What you're seeing in here, this is the voice of the person telling the story, and this is the brain activity in here. So what we found was quite interesting. What we found was, based on the brain activity of the people, there was a nice grouping. One side of the plot are what we can say like conventional way of communication, like speaker, video chat. And the other side was the robotic agents, the physically embodied medium, and the face-to-face or the human interactions, human-level interactions. You can see that the brain activity of the human and the physically embodied robots, they were actually forming a group that they did not differ from one another, whereas both of them were different from a more conventional way of communication, which was based on the speaker or the video chat. What is more interesting about this is they differed from video chat, and that means just the visual information that you're receiving from your communication partner is not enough. It's not just the fact of seeing something, it's about feeling the presence of that thing, being in the same place together, that situatedness, that presence of the other. And interestingly, we didn't find any effect of age, so it was not about like the younger generation, older generation, or something like that. Another result that we found was the brain activity was correlating, the responses of the people was along the way that their brain activity was. So as you can see here, these are the numbers. I'm really sorry that's the easiest way I can talk about this. I tried not to make it too much number-based, but so what you can see is the brain activity was along the same way as of the responses of the people. So basically, if someone was saying, yes, the story was difficult, their brain activity was equivalently higher than the person who was saying the story was easy and their brain activity was lower. Interestingly, the slope of this line is higher when you get to the places that there are physical embodiments of the agents. Using this information and using the responses of the people, we actually found that we can predict with a very high predictability who is feeling difficult, who is feeling easy. And it was easy to actually say it just by having their brain activity. Interestingly, again, what we observed was the information, the predictability of easy or hard by people was increasing by the fact of physical embodiment of those agents. The medium that has a physical embodiment was easier to tell that people are feeling difficult when they were listening to them than the other medium. And also about the human presence, this was quite a nice result that actually was kind of promising and told us that we are in the right direction. And what we see is, when there was no physical embodiment, it was negative, and it was the speaker. And that negative means, the question was, when you were listening to this story, you felt that the person who was telling you the story was there or not? And they said no. And that was immediately obvious because it wasn't a speaker. There was no physical embodiment in there. There was no presence in there. Whereas in case of the physically embodied medium and the face-to-face, like human to human, they said yes, they felt it. Well, this one should be there. It's trivial. But this one was also along the same thing. Interestingly, it wasn't in case of the video chat. Again, just the visual information is not the fact of feeling someone is there. That result means it is not just me seeing someone, but I have to feel it. The presence of that person should be felt in order to make the feeling of the human presence in there. So the results that we observed was basically the physical embodiment was quite important. It was a determining factor on the effect that they have on the brain activity and how the brain activity changes. It correlated also with the fact that they felt difficult. So if someone was feeling difficult, it was easier to say that they were feeling difficult if they were using a kind of medium that had a body, whether it was a human or it was a robot. It also helped to show that whether they feel tired or they felt another human is there. That fact of human presence is quite a nice thing to know, and that's because when you're introducing this new media into the human life, that becomes the time that how we can bring them together other than divide them. Instead of pushing them into the virtual environment, we can actually bring them by the fact that I still feel the presence of this person in here. So given those results, we went for the second part of our paradigm, and that was, so okay, we see that the physical embodiment is making a difference. If it is making a difference, would it be also important, would it be also the same if I interact with it, if I physically get engaged with it, if I hold it, if I hug it? And there we were actually asking this question, that the huggable medium can make us feel relaxed, and that feeling of the relaxation is quite persistent. It is not an effect of just having something for sometimes, and then after a while it's going to vanish and it's going to go away. In this case, we use this guy. His name is Hugby. It's not a robot. It's just a cushion. It looks like a human. I mean, minimally it looks like a human shape. It has a pocket. We put a speaker or a cell phone into that pocket, and then people hold it like this. And we compared this one against using the speaker or the cell phone directly. And again, we used the storytelling. We didn't go for the actual communication because we wanted to keep the contact and the contents constant for everyone. So we can say this is actually the effect of the embodiment. And the story this time was for 15 minutes. They listened to of the stories from their child stories. The difference, again, the next difference in this study was instead of using the FNIRS that we used previously, which was indirect measurements of the brain, as I said, the oxygen that is received to the brain, we used this time what is called as of the EEG, electroencephalogram. And that actually picks the actual electrical activity in your brain. When the neurons are doing something, that picks it. And then you can give it to a computer, do some processing, and see what part of the brain was active. And there are 5 different frequencies that people generally look into when they look into the brain activity. And you can see the indication of those that they are delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. In this particular study that we were actually looking for, what was important, the most important one was delta. This is what goes high when you fall asleep. When we are sleeping, the delta goes high. Theta goes down when you're, again, in this state of the sleep. Alpha is associated with the time that you feel relaxed. You're not feeling under pressure. Everything is going well, and you're kind of fine with it. Beta is the time of the actively thinking, when you're problem solving, for instance, when you have some mathematical problem and you want to solve it. And the gamma is for the time that you're doing the actual decision making. That's a very crucial time that you want to make a decision between several different things. Given all these things, what was interesting for us and what we were interested in was we didn't want that delta goes high, because if it goes high, it means it is not that they are actually enjoying the conversation, they're just falling asleep. And we wanted the rest to go down, because we wanted to see that they feel relaxed, but they are not feeling under pressure. And that's basically what we found. Like delta was lower in the case of the Hugby than the mobile phone, which means they were not falling asleep, thankfully. And the rest of the brain activity was going down in the case of the Hugby than the phone that they were using, which means their brain activity, the power in the brain activity, the amount of signaling that was happening was kind of lowering when they were listening to the same story, when they listened to it through the cell phone, than when they listened to it through the Hugby, that physically embodied agent that they were hugging. But then that was not enough. We wanted to see that it can happen like at a very short amount of time and then affect the rest of the computation that we were doing. So it was not really reliable. We wanted to see whether it goes all the way through the activity that they had for the 15, 16 minutes. And that basically was the case. What we see was it was increasing. This was the case of the mobile, how the brain activity was changing. This shows that person to person how it was changing, how it was varying between the different people. But what was important was this curvature that we were looking at over the time. And this scale is like when you look at the brain in the first second, you look at the second second, third second, all the way to the 20 seconds, and you can bring it together, average it or something, and you see exactly the same things are still happening. Or even better, it can actually increase. That means the dynamic of the brain wasn't changing, or it was increasing. That means it was still engaging with the story that it was receiving, but not feeling under pressure with it. Think about it as of when you're playing a coin, no matter how many million times you play this coin, you would never ever be able to say what will be the result of the next coin. If I play it now and you said heads or tails and you come up with the heads or tails, no matter which one, if you play this game for a million times, million plus one, you're still in the same place that you used to be in the first game. You would never, ever be able to say what would. That's a complete randomness, which means there are so much information in this. And by information, it means it is not predictable. It is always giving you something new. Of course, it's always heads or tails, but it is still new. The next time could be the same as of the previous one, or could be something different. This basically says the same thing. This says the brain, when they were hugging something and listening to that story, never changed the interest, never lost the interest. It still continues to have that activity that you cannot tell whether it was due to this, or it's still continuing from the previous state, or no, it is increasing. And that was a good sign. That means there was a persistency in the effect. It stays there. And as I mentioned, that was the result that we see. We saw that the activity was going down, so person was feeling relaxed, but that going down doesn't mean that they're losing it altogether. It meant that the activity that is lower, it still has a certain dynamic that is better than the case that you were looking into it when it was through the speaker, for instance. So what are the implications of all these results that we see? What are the potentials for these results that we see? So I'm going to share a few slides in here. This is preschoolers before nap time, kids listening to a story. They're actually listening to a story, but it doesn't look like listening to anything. Everyone is doing, they're just going on the rampage. They're just doing whatever they want to do. And this is suppose the time that they get ready for their nap times. And yeah, you don't even listen, you don't even hear the story. And then we gave them the Hugby. And they started listening. Of course, like, I'm not going to exaggerate on this. It has to be reproduced and has to go through all tests and everything. But there are some potential in there in order to make them feel more comfortable and ready and give the caregivers also some time in order to maintain them better. And the next thing is about how we feel about these agents. They are going to come to our life sooner than later. This is the study that we did with Erica, the robot. And here we were studying how the robot is going to react. So the fact of how they react to your touch when you're trying to reach them. And which one feels more comfortable or which one feels more naturalistic. So the other question is, when these agents come into our life and when we introduce them to our life, we want them to make us feel more comfortable. We want them to make us feel that they're not others. They're not just the machines. Of course, they're machines, but at the same time, they're supposed to be social machines, which means we should feel comfortable about them and around them than things like iRobot movie or things like that. We want them to actually make us feel better. And in order to do so, we need to make them act and react to us in a way that is familiar to us. So that makes it easier to accept them. And this is not just the case for the robot. Like, think about it as of a kid. Like, if a kid goes, let's say, goes to an event, a 5 years old, 4 years old kid, and there is a person, let's say, Stephen Hawking. He comes in, late Stephen Hawking, with his wheelchairs and quite like, I don't know, alien style of voice, and start talking. You cannot stop that kid staring at him. This is not because he's impolite or, I don't know, rude or whatever we are calling it when we are growing up. It's just the fact that that looks weird. I've never seen such a thing before. Tell me what is happening in here. His brain is trying to figure out what is happening. That happens to all of us. Now the world is getting closer. That's why my accent doesn't make you feel weird, or you try not to feel weird, but actually it is weird because I'm talking English, but I don't sound like an English person. And it is natural. It is normal that you find it weird, but you then try to figure out how to deal with it. And this is the fact of life. So if these agents are coming into our life, we have to make us feel the same way. Otherwise, it is not going to be the same as of a car or any other tools, because those tools are just tools. We use them and we decide how to use them. These guys are going to act. And if they're going to act, sometimes it becomes more difficult to feel comfortable around them. Which brings us to what is known as of a new line of research nowadays, which is called as of a machine behavior. This is again from the Marshall McLuhan, very last page of his book, The Medium is the Massage. The medium that we are using, like nowadays everyone probably knows about it, is turning us to something like numbers in the society that we have, and that's from the Alice in the Wonderland. And there are new people coming in, and there are new kids. And I told you about the study that I said, like, it's a very interesting study, which was very young kids. They received the robot after 5 months as of one of their own kind. That means it wouldn't be too difficult to manipulate our society if we're going to be using these devices and introduce them at the right time. And then we can actually make those kids feel about them the way that we want. Or we can be responsible about it and decide what is actually the right thing to do and use them in a way that is going to enhance their way of living, enhance their way of communications and being together in the social life, than manipulating them the way that today's communicative media is to some extent doing. And that brings me to the end of my presentation today. Thank you very much for your time and listening. I think we're finished with it.
So thank you very much, Soheil. A really very interesting piece of research and something that we are going to have to get more and more used.
Definitely.
So we have like a few minutes for questions to the audience. I'll shoot first. I think that the first very important question is, where can you buy a Huey? Right? Because I think every parent that has little kids would like to have one of your havable robots to take them before going to bed. Okay, jokes apart. It's not clear though to me, like, so in the last part of you said like future directions, and you were studying all this naturality and interaction. But it looked to me that actually, so with not very much looking human, so the interaction was, so we were already interacting a lot different than in just in front of us speakers. So looking at the future and willing that machines are still machines, how do you think how much is important actually that we go for a like true human kind of like feeling interaction, or would it be okay just like to leave them like looking at and behaving like robots?
That's a very interesting question, a very important question. I think different people have different take on it. And if I'm going to be answering it personally, it is not much about how human it feels or it looks. Of course, it is, as I said, it's quite subjective. Different people might have different opinion about it. But personally, what I think about it is how far they can enhance and they can introduce something to our life that might be more useful or much of a more improvement than what we already have. Like, if you want to have an interaction with another human, just go to the park and talk to someone. Or get married, have a kid, and then interact with that kid. But these are the parts that are supposed to address things that we don't have. They are extension of our evolution in our evolutionary line. So they are supposed to bring something on the table that we don't have it. So it is not much to just address in a very brief. It's not much about how much they look like a human, but how much of a better feeling they bring us to us, whatever that means is going to be.
Okay. I have some other question. Yes? ¿Tenemos un micro? Ahora ve.
Thank you. We've seen some amazing experiments with these human-to-machine interfaces, and I was wondering if you notice differences with cultural aspects, meaning that a person from Japan will be differently interacting with the environment than a person more in United States or Germany, for instance. And up to which extent you will have to take this into account when modeling all the physical experiments?
That's an excellent question. That's, well, in our team, we haven't looked into that aspect yet. There was one study back in 2016 that was mostly on the responses on the questionnaire. They took the same agent into some Danish elderly care facility. There was a mixed responses. It wasn't very clear. But definitely that's going to make a huge difference. Like how people mentalize the aspect of the social life, how the culture defines it to them. That would be a very defining factor, and it does not necessarily mean that if you're getting some results in some part of the world, it's going to be actually generalized to the rest of the world. And it requires further research, which hopefully we are going to get through the community and more like the cooperative work and collaborative work.
Good. So I have another one because so this morning, so I was presenting some numbers on the market, and actually, so right now, the investments that have more return to value, depending on the sector, obviously, but so where people are investing a lot more, it's in virtual agents, right? Those are, right now, like it's kind of like in decision support systems, but also virtual agents.
Yeah.
And the basic, so the key within the virtual agents that are bringing value to business is within the customer interaction. What we have now is the Alexas, the Google Homes, or the virtual agents that pop up in a computer, right? So have you seen studies on this, on really how these interactions can actually help or not better?
There are tons of new research areas that are working on the virtual agents. In fact, there is a new line of research in our group that we are actually focusing on the virtual environment. And one of the reasons is because virtual environment is more manageable. And you can it's easier to make that character act in a certain way because you're making a cartoon. It's an animation. But the studies are showing actually, regardless, the effect is the same. People taking them as of another human being, they interact with them the same way, and they feel more uncomfortable if they make too much of good results. If they act very rationally, if they don't make mistakes, that's the point that makes them uncomfortable, because that becomes unhuman. We all make mistakes. If something is too perfect, that becomes too good to be true, and don't buy it anymore.
That's tricky. And then, apart from cultural, have you seen these differences between ages? Because you mentioned the case of your Google Assistant. We have at home some Alexa that we switch on only at some times in order to play some music. And I see a difference between myself and my kids. So my kids tell Alexa, "Can you please put this song?" And I was not doing it until I noticed them treating it nicely. So now I'm also saying to my Alexa, "Please, could you play some Catalan music or something?" Have you seen also in age interactions?
Personally, I'm not aware of any results on that. In my own life, as I just shared it with the audience, it happened to me. You mentioned about your own kid. And also the previous results also showed that there is such a thing that people actually buy them as of human. Whether it is going to be affected by the age, intuitively you can actually consider it because they grew up with it and they accept it differently than us. One of the studies that I showed in here was also saying the same thing, 10 to 24 months kid. Initially they look at it as of a toy. By the end of the study, they receive it as of a human being. And they treating him, putting him to sleep, covering him, not to feel cold and things like that. So there is definitely an age factor that makes things to go more smooth, or you can actually sell it to them as of something real, than people who are coming from the older generations that they are not used to it and they don't feel comfortable about it.
Interesting. And then the last one, because we will run out of time.
Sure.
So it's not about robotics, but I was thinking also in a business environment and teleworking, right? So we are more and more used to people being around, not seeing people face to face, having only chats or having video rooms. Some companies can have very expensive equipment, right? Like you actually see and stuff.
Sure.
Do you know, it's quite related to your studies. I don't know, if it studied how effective or how much effectiveness you lose with respect to one to another in a business environment, or if you could think about something about this.
That's an interesting question. Not all aspect of the social life has been actually covered by these studies because it's quite a new field of study, this socially assistive robotics and things like that. But there are actually indications that they make a difference. For instance, they took two different systems, one having a face and the other one just being a computer. And then they gave people health advices. And the people relied on the one that has a face, a smiley face, or something that they could actually connect with it as of a face. They bought those advices more realistic and they rely on it and they felt this is more reliable than the one that was coming through the computer per se. So the embodied agency makes a difference because that takes us one step closer to what we have in our daily life. There are two aspects of it. One is the agency. I am the one who is making a decision. And second one is the experience. I feel just like you. I can feel your pain. I can feel your happiness. Being physically there, that makes it easier to imagine such a thing. That if he's saying something, that thing is probably coming from his own experience also. Probably something down to, like in subconscious, not necessarily like actively thinking about it.
Okay, so thanks for your answer. So let's thank Soheil again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.